And Jane, for those of you who haven't heard, is going to be starting a PhD program at Northeastern this fall in computer science, and got a fancy fellowship because she's doing such a great job, and it's very exciting. So, okay, Jane, go for it.
Thanks. All right, so the topic today is from liminal space to latent space, generative adversarial networks as a medium. I'm presenting featuring Alexa Woodward, so I think I'll start with kind of GANs in general, and then when we talk about the album project, I'll bring in Alexa to maybe say a few words about the album itself. So what is a GAN? I'm sure that some of you in this call probably could speak a little bit better to the kind of fine details of this than I could, but just generally, GAN stands for Generative Adversarial Network. So it's actually two neural networks that are sort of in conversation with each other. The first is this generator here, which is creating a bunch of fake images. And then here's this discriminator who's sort of like the judge who basically sees real samples and then the generated fake samples from the generator and decides whether it's a real image or it's a fake image. And then at the end, it's revealed in actuality, is it correct or not? And based on whether the discriminator was correct, it sort of gets some feedback through fine-tuned training, and that information is given back to the generator. So then the generator takes that information and uses it to create better and better fakes, essentially. Segmentation is a really interesting approach to figuring out exactly what each node in the generator's neural network is doing. So this allows you to, by switching on and off specific nodes within the network, to figure out what those nodes are controlling through segmentation. So in this example, we can see the feature map and then the thresholded image and then the image segmentation, which tells us that the node that was turned off was controlling for sky, for example. FID score is the Fréchet inception distance. So this is a measure of the difference between two image data sets. So a lower FID score means that there's more similarity between the data sets. So theoretically, as a GAN trains, the FID score will decrease, and a very low FID score could indicate that it's overfitting, so it's matching the source data set exactly. But generally, the lower the FID score, the better your model is doing. This was an example from a paper that I really liked, which shows what happens when the Celeb A dataset is contaminated by ImageNet images, which include like cars and clocks and bags and things like that. And you can see the FID score going up as the generated dataset becomes further and further away from the Celeb A original dataset. So I was really curious what would happen if I took like one picture and then trained an image GAN on 1,000 identical images. And so I copied all of these pictures of my face and trained the image GAN for 2,000 steps on my face. And interestingly, it didn't produce a static image, or it didn't produce like all identical images. I think maybe if I had trained it for more than 2,000 steps, it would have converged on that actual image. But because the GAN is using like probability distributions to assign pixels to locations, it actually creates this kind of interesting, like warbly, almost hallucinogenic looking picture that kind of you can sense that those faces are still underneath there somewhere. And you can see here the FID score going from 346 down to 56 at 2,000 steps. So GANs are becoming more and more ubiquitous in the news. You may have seen This Person Does Not Exist was a website that went viral a couple years ago that showed these images of people that seem pretty photorealistic. They're 1024 by 1024, so it's a pretty high resolution image. There's definitely some like things in the background that might alert you to the fact that it's computer generated. But in general, they could fool the average person, I think, if you were looking at them at like profile picture scale. Jukebox from OpenAI popped up in the music channel recently. So this was a GAN with CNN that basically creates computer generated music based like inspired by this huge data repository of thousands of music samples from across a bunch of different genres. And they actually also used a GAN to generate lyrics for the songs as well. And then GAN from NVIDIA was a really cool project where you basically have this like super simple MS Paint user interface, and then it's able to generate these really beautiful, like photorealistic landscape images based on the very simple drawing that you do in the UI. There are also a lot of practical uses of GANs in photography and film. So content-aware fill is one that's used really commonly, that is used to like remove things from images. It works in video also. I thought this was a super cool example that I hadn't seen before. NVIDIA Research also released Deep Fill, which involves a little bit more complex like neural network configurations, but seems to perform a lot better. And then background matting is absolutely incredible where this technology has gone just in the last few years to be able to pick out like this really fine detail in this woman's hair and to totally remove this relatively complex background, green screen it, and then apply a new background is pretty impressive and something that would have taken an animator an extremely long time to do by hand. Texture upsampling is another cool application of image GANs. So ESR GAN is one in particular I came across that basically allows you to take like pixel art and turn it into these more realistic looking images. So this kind of allows people to breathe new life into old favorite video games and reskin them for the 21st century. Deep fakes are also another application of GANs, which could be hilarious or terrifying depending on the context. This is one example of Jimmy Fallon impersonating Donald Trump through deep fake. But then on the sort of darker side of things, the story in the news from last year was about an AI app that undressed women. So it was basically trained on thousands of images of naked women, and then allowed people to upload a picture of a clothed woman and digitally undress her, which kind of brings up some issues of ethics and data privacy. And the use of this algorithm has been banned in California, and I think is in discussion in some other states now. So thinking about GANs as a medium, I wanted to give an extremely brief excerpt of digital art theory. This is just kind of scratching the surface, but just four kinds of concepts that I wanted to touch on briefly. First is the medium is the message. Marshall McLuhan wrote this book that basically talks about the idea that increasingly with digital art and new technology, the medium becomes the message. So it's not just about the content per se, but it's also about where you're consuming it. So whether it's a smartphone or radio, and we also see this in the resurgence of interest in old technology, right? Like, so when vinyl records kind of re-entered into the hipster scene, people started to really look for those records where you could actually hear the sorts of pops and crackles of the needle as it was running across the surface of the record, or in revamping old film photography cameras, the sort of lens flares and image grains and things like that that we might have previously seen as defects are now really valued as part of the artwork itself. Mackenzie Wark is a trans scholar who has written extensively about the idea of intellectual property and authored the Hacker Manifesto, which kind of paved the way for remix culture in art, and the idea that intellectual property in a way can inhibit artists and can make it harder for artists to share their art or to create art that sort of builds on the work of other artists in the past. Walter Benjamin, at the turn of the 19th century, wrote about the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, which is a really fantastic book that just kind of addresses the idea of the creator or the original work of art as having this aura that the mechanical reproduction doesn't quite have. And so this is a really interesting concept when we think about digital art and how you can, recreate something digitally, pixel by pixel, but sort of how does that aura of the authentic, of the original, kind of travel through digital space. And then just very broadly, the ideas of postmodernism and then post-postmodernism and anti-art and anti-anti-art are really interesting topics. So postmodernism was sort of this rejection of modernism, of futurism, and sort of like the fetishization of the future. And that was sort of where we saw like Marcel Duchamp's Fountain and the Dadaist art movement, whereas postmodernism kind of pushed back against postmodernism and said, it's how can we be sort of like meta-modernist about this and think about postmodernism and modernism as being in conversation with one another. And so that's where you also see the rise of art styles like glitch art, which is like very kind of just like enjoying the nature of GIFs and digital art as a medium, and not necessarily celebrating it, but also not damning it either. And then also with anti-art and anti-art. So anti-art was sort of this idea that, hey, paintings don't have to be photorealistic representations of life. And then anti-art saying, well, yes, but also not everything needs to be, fully abstracted into something like a Jackson Pollock or, the supremacist art movement. It can also be, we can also celebrate the sort of traditional practice of creating photorealistic images. So all of this has just been floating around in my head as I've been experimenting with GANs. If it's something that interests you, I would recommend looking more at some of this literature. So then I wanted to share some of the GANs' art that have really inspired me to get interested in this as a medium. The first is Helena Sarin, who I saw speak at I/O Festival in Minneapolis 2 years ago. And she does all of her own photography for the images that she trains her neural nets on. This project in particular really fascinated me. It's called Leaves as Manifold. So she photographed thousands and thousands of autumn leaves and then trained an image GAN on them. And the images are really beautiful and really interesting because they, at first glance, kind of look like a leaf that you might find on the ground, but then when you actually study the the patterns in the leaf shapes or the fact that they have two stems, things like that, the sort of hand of the neural network kind of comes through in the work, which is just fascinating to me. Fuse is another artist collective that created this series Artificial Botany, which is trained on botanical illustrations. So all of these plants and flowers don't actually exist in nature, but they're kind of what the neural network has generated as potential images, ones that passed the discriminator and were considered to look as real as the originals. Sophia Crespo is another artist who has done a lot of experimentation with GANs in this sort of like Cronenberg-like way, where she will train a neural network on thousands of historical images or National Geographic photography of creatures in the ocean and animals in nature, and produces these like just really interesting creatures that are so far derived from reality, but really beautiful in their own right. Robbie Barrett is another artist, also at Videodrome on Twitter, who made headlines a few years ago for his work in training training GANs on historical paintings. So these are some GAN generated paintings that he created. And then Portrait of Edmund de Bellamy, you may have seen before. This one was sold by Obvious Collective a couple years ago at auction for upwards of $400,000, and was kind of heralded as the first art that was created by a computer. Interestingly, this was a controversial piece because it was actually created using Robbie Barrett's model that he had trained from the NVIDIA style GAN. And there are like comments on Robbie Barrett's GitHub page of Obvious Collective posting questions asking about how to implement it. And they didn't really give a whole lot of credit or any like monetary compensation to Robbie Barrett for when the art piece sold. And so that was kind of controversial in the art community. And it's interesting because on one hand, like these pre-trained models are really commonly used by artists. But it starts to get into this interesting gray area where then an artist goes through the effort of collecting their own images and training a model beyond where it was pre-trained to, and then others might take that model and then use it straight out of the box without any additional training to just generate one image. So beyond GANs, there's other applications of machine learning in art as a medium. Neural style transfer is one, which uses convolutional neural networks to transfer one art style to a new image or video. So you can see the original up here, and then some of the original artworks that are then used to create the style transfer. And then many of you are probably familiar with Deep Dream, which is a deep convolutional neural network from Google that creates these kind of bizarre computational hallucinations. This video is on YouTube also, and it has an audio track. And while it's called Deep Dream, I think that it's more nightmare-like than anything. So I would recommend that you watch it in the light of day. So one thing that I've been concerned about in using GANs as a medium is the environmental impact of them. So to train StyleGAN 2 at 1024 by 1024 resolution at the scale of something like This Person Does Not Exist, where you're actually trying to create something that to the human eye is indistinguishable from the original, it would be estimated to be something like 553 kilowatt hours, which is the greenhouse gas emissions from about 970 miles driven by an average passenger car, or 44 gallons of gasoline. You could also think about this in terms of charging your smartphone almost 50,000 times. So everything that we do as data scientists is, has some environmental impact, and it's important to keep this in mind, and also to, as best as we can, to quantify things like this. There are some other neural networks that have been studied that have a much higher carbon footprint, that really we should investigate sort of what the trade-offs are and how we can work to offset that environmental impact. So some tools for experimenting with GANs. I think for the coders in the room, using TensorFlow is probably allows you for more sort of detailed fine tuning in working with GANs. So it's a Python package that allows you to run these kinds of latent walk interpolations between nodes in the lower levels of the network and animate them. Personally, because I was just kind of getting into this more as an art form and really wanting to be able to interact directly with the latent space and with video editing tools, I've been using Runway ML. So Runway is an online platform. It uses provides like pre-trained models. So NVIDIA style GAN, and then it has models that are pre-trained, for example, on faces, on cars, on graffiti, on and botanical illustrations, I think was another one. Or I think they're actually just in general illustrations. There were a lot of birds in the data set that I saw. And so they allow for pre-trained models. They allow training on your own models on their cloud GPUs, which is a huge time advantage. But they also allow local training as well. You can export latent space videos and images, and you can also pipe models via API to your own project or website. So why I'm using Runway ML, it's also uses carbon neutral or renewable energy sources. So I actually reached out to them and asked them, hey, is there any way of estimating what the carbon footprint of these training these models is? And they did say that their infrastructure, their cloud GPU runs on AWS data centers that are 100% carbon neutral. And they also use Google Cloud, and GCP runs on 100% renewable energy, but they're still looking at other solutions also, including carbon removal technology. The pre-trained models also means less training time and less environmental impact. The access to cloud GPUs allows for shorter training time. The easy UI allows for interactive latent space exploration. And it also provides cloud storage of image and text training data. So once I have all of my images, I can just upload them once and I can train multiple models. And then also it gives these really great like progress videos while the model is training. So you can sort of see how your model is progressing and cancel it if things aren't going well or as expected. So my first experiment was kind of inspired first when Studio Ghibli released a database of high-resolution images from their archives to celebrate the animator Hayao Miyazaki's 80th birthday. If you don't know Miyazaki, he's known for films such as Howl's Moving Castle, My Neighbor Totoro, Spirited Away, Ponyo, Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind, and Princess Mononoke. If you're ever looking for something to watch while in quarantine, I highly, highly recommend these movies. They're just really delightful and absolutely beautiful shows of animation prowess and storytelling as well. So my first experiment, I used these images from Studio Ghibli that they had released to the public, and I used a StyleGAN 2 model that was pre-trained on historical illustrations, which in the first frame of this, you can see that a lot of them here are kind of bird-like. And then after 3,000 epochs, it had changed quite a bit. So this is kind of what it looked like after 3,000 epochs of training. So this is kind of a pixelated version, but this was the output video that I got, and some stills from the latent space that I took. So then one thing that I was curious about, when I saw the results from this experiment, I could see that there were a lot of like faces and buildings. And one thing that I really like about Miyazaki's animation is his landscapes. So I was curious if I could train a model that was only based on landscape images. So if you take all of the pixels in an animation frame and you just average them together, you're basically going to get something that's like gray or brown because you're mixing all of the colors together and just getting mud. So how do we pick out the most dominant color from an image? Well, one of the best ways that I came across was using k-means pixel clustering on all video frames to get the top 5 most dominant colors. So basically, you take all of these pixels, you put them into 3-dimensional space, and then cluster them to their nearest mean. So I picked the top 5 to do, so it would be 5 means instead of k-means. And then what I did was I got this color profile for every single image in the data set and then filtered by the HSV range. So where the pixels fell in this 3-dimensional space, to try and get only like blues and greens, which hopefully would be landscapes. So on the left, you see frames that were excluded that are mostly warm palette. So here you can see the average and then the dominant colors. These actually are pretty good averages that are similar to the dominant colors, whereas some of the other frames, not so much. But so these ones I excluded from the training data, and these ones I included from into the training data that were landscapes and skies. So on the left, you see the original Studio Ghibli model that I trained, and then on the right, the new model that was trained only on the landscapes. I really liked the color palette of these, but you definitely still can see some characters making appearances. So Kiki from Kiki's Delivery Service, I think, pops up in some locations. Totoro definitely makes an appearance. Shigeru from Spirited Away and Princess Mononoke, I think, also makes some appearances. So it's just kind of funny to see. And so this is the second experiment of the Ghibli landscapes video, and then some selected frames from the latent space. So I posted these to Instagram, and Alexa messaged me right away. The incredible Alexa Woodward, who recently informed me that she has her own Wikipedia page. I think we as fans need to do some updating of it. And she contacted me about this new album that she's working on, and the idea to use these latent walks in a GAN music video. So maybe Alexa, if you wanted to chime in and talk a little bit about the album and your process in creating it.
Yeah. Well, this was really fun for me doing this with Jane because this has been my like mental health pandemic project. So yeah, I haven't put an album out in many years. I think my last album came out when I was like 7 months pregnant, and my son is now 6. So I've just had like writer's block, whatever. Anyway, this this album is very meaningful to me because I had cancer last year, and luckily I survived it, and I'm doing well. But it was pretty scary, and so yeah, that process of kind of reflecting on that led to me wanting to write songs again as part of processing it. And then I worked on these songs over the last year with two really close, geographically far but artistically close collaborators in Texas and in South Carolina. Two people who put a lot of really cool, weird stuff into this album. For those of you who are fans of Carl Sagan, Voyager is a song that has some fun Carl Sagan references. And my friend Daniel, who worked with me on this album, he found like he took a piece of like the original Cosmos musical intro and ran it through his tape machine and like turned it around so he's playing it backwards. Anyway, it's in there. There's all kinds of cool, weird, beautiful little digital things happening in the album. But yeah, when I saw Jane's stuff, I was like, oh, this is like so beautiful and aesthetically feels like could be such an amazing visual representation of this creative process. It's been really important to me. So yeah, it was really fun. We we had an initial call about kind of talking through the lyrics of each song and thinking about what kinds of imagery would actually be meaningful or interesting to explore. So one of the really fun ones that I think is super silly is why it's wild things ended up with the Octonauts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like my son has been obsessed with the Octonauts, which is, if you don't have children, you may not have watched it. But it's a pretty cool. It's basically like, imagine like if Star Trek were like tiny little animals exploring the ocean, but with great like scientific accuracy about creatures. So it's super fun. So yeah, that funny little creature with the eyeballs and the green square is kind of a really manipulated looking Octonaut. Um, Yeah, and we went through different iterations of one in particular. I think "Waiting on You" is a song that's about kind of, you know, coming from a background where I was religious and I'm no longer religious. It's sort of a, yeah, kind of like a, well, you'll hear it eventually when it comes out, maybe, but
I'm gonna go
yeah.
through some of the like process also for each song.
Oh, cool. Okay, well, I'll let you do that then. I don't want to ramble on too much.
So Survival was the first song on the album, is the first song on the album. And Alexa, you had spoken to kind of your thoughts during the George Floyd protest during the summer, and like this feeling of you know, collective protest, and like what do we do about, you know, the injustices that we see in the world. And I was reminded of this project from Northeastern from a couple of years ago called Art of the March, where they took on this monumental effort to collect all of the posters from the Boston Women's March during Trump's inauguration in 2017, like 6,000 scans of images. And so I started, I found the repository, I got in touch with the people who collected the data, and they gave me access to their API and downloaded all of these images. And so on the left, you see a sample of some of the images, and then on the right, a GIF of the latent walk output. But it was sort of frustrating because even though there's so much like passion and power in these signs, I think we forget sometimes how much the words add to the impact. And so when they're abstracted by the GAN, you kind of lose that punchiness. And so we decided that this wasn't quite the direction that we wanted to go. But I did send this video to the people at Northeastern just as a thank you to, you know, let them know where it had ended up, and they were really happy about it. So maybe it'll be on some screens at the library whenever they reopen. So then we tried a couple other experiments. On the left, this one is a graffiti database that actually Runway ML has. Another one that kind of didn't quite get at the you know, importance of the words that were in the training data. The one on the right is images scraped from several news footage videos of the Black Lives Matter protests this summer. You know, it's from this summer because you can see masks popping up in some locations. And also you can see the posters that were being held up by people. Then we started thinking about the idea of fire, because there's some lyrics in the song about fire and light. And so I found this data repository of images that are used for detecting fire. For example, like forest fires, or in a restaurant, you can see this pizza with some fire here. So it was a big data set. But I didn't realize at the time that some of the images were pretty low resolution. And so the resulting video, actually the GAN, I think, tried to replicate the like low resolution effect. But I wanted to continue with this fire idea. So I found this website that has royalty-free stock photos called Unsplash, and an open source package called Bulk Splash that allows bulk downloading. And I actually went through and hand selected about 1,000 fire images from that website. And then we trained this video.
Who you gonna call when the lights go out? Who you gonna call when the world burns down? What if this is your one chance to live?
I won't give too many spoilers. But I think we were both really happy with how this one turned out. This is just an excerpt from like the video editing process where you can actually see that I adjusted the speed of the video depending on what part of the song it was at and kind of what the speed of the song was. This next one is Voyager. So this one was pre-trained on landscapes and then trained on a data repository of NASA images of nebula. And I'm just going to jump to the middle of this one as an example.
Fill up an empty space. If I told you this was easy, I'd be a liar. I'll be with you in the time we made, in the songs we played. I'll be with you.
These videos are just really, it's been an honor like working on them because I feel like I just get lost in the space that is created by them. And the lyrics are really powerful, and just hearing Alexa's story about, you know, her thoughts in creating these videos and thinking about mortality and thinking about connection to other people. I think the videos just make like a really cool space to hang out in and feel all your feelings. Keeps the Light On is one that if anyone is following Maps Out, the Twitter bot that I made, you'll have seen some of the training images. So these are from the European Digital Archive of Soil Maps and the USGS Geological Survey. So on the right, this is the EU DASM website and kind of what the images look like. And then on the left here, you can see all of these squares are the artboards where I actually cropped out scenes from the image. Because these images are super high resolution, but they have a lot of like metadata in the corners. And I knew that if I trained the neural net on just the raw images, it was going to pull in a lot of the supplemental information, but I really wanted to just get the kind of texture of the land. So on the left, here's all the downloaded images in a folder. And then on the right, here's all the manually cropped and processed images. I also knew that the neural net wasn't going to be able to replicate the language at all. So it didn't matter what orientation the images were in. And so this was really handy because it allowed me to write like a bulk processing script that would just rotate and flip all of the images so I could generate like 8 times as many images just by rotating and flipping them and then including all of those in the training data. So it keeps the light on. I don't have the demo video queued up because I'm working on a second version of it. But yeah, if you want to follow Maps Out, it's just a bot that tweets some of the training data, but they're really beautiful and close up. And then this is a GIF of one of the latent walks that I created specifically going through like the whole rainbow, and then some stills from that video also. It's really interesting how the neural net creates rivers that could never exist in real life. It kind of reminds me of Helena Saren's Leaves in that regard. Wild Things is the one that Alexa had mentioned that was trained on frames from the Octonauts, specifically their episode, The Great Barrier Reef. So this one I thought was pretty funny because it has characters.
You are a wilderness. I know this firsthand. I like to get lost in snowstorms where no track
Pale Blue Dot, I actually found this data repository of a bunch of images from Magic the Gathering cards, just like cropped to the image of the creature itself. These are some of the stills from the GAN output. And oh wait, I was gonna make you guys guess. And this video is really interesting too, because I think that you can sort of see some of the like the fibers of the Magic the Gathering cards kind of come through in the video.
Deep in my old bones, the stories come trembling. Flashing faces, footprints of a fox in fresh fallen snow. Everything breathing, I feel it under my skin.
I'm really doing a terrible injustice to these videos by starting them at random times and then stopping them before you get to hear them, but all the more reason to stay tuned for the upcoming album. And then Waiting on You, originally we had spoken, Alexa and I, about like religious imagery. I tried to find a repository of like Orthodox paintings from like the mid 1500s, but was having trouble tracking down like a big repository of them. I did end up getting a bunch of images of cathedrals, and so I trained a model on cathedrals, which created these church-like structures, but they were a little bit, I don't know, Alexa, how would you say, like stuffy or like not quite?
Yeah, it's so interesting because the visuals really influence the way you experience the song. And so I feel like we had come across these really great like expressions of the lyrics that were complemented by the visuals in most of the songs. But this one, even though it was technically like really cool looking, it just, you kind of like lost the sense of sort of, I don't know, contemplation or longing that was in the lyrics. So yeah.
So then we talked a little bit about like nature, and sort of thinking about like the wonder of creation and you know, everything that's around us, the kinds of things that you might think about while you're in a church, but really you'd find more in the mountains. So I trained another model on a forest data set, but this one was like a lot of woods, and oh yeah, this is a process GIF of the post-processing GIF creation process. So this is kind of what it looks like to actually export a GIF from a video that's been trained, and then I made a GIF of it. But then Alexa had this idea of like, well, what about space? What about including like wide open spaces in this data set also? So I collected a whole bunch of images that included like mountains and lakes, in particular deserts was one that that Alexa had mentioned, and trained a new StyleGAN model on these images. And personally, this is like one of my favorite videos that I think came out of it. They're all really cool, but these ones in particular, just like I might have to get some prints to hang on the wall.
I've been waiting on you. If you're there, could you say
One thing that was interesting about this piece was like, it also made me realize that GANs don't work the way that paints do, in that with paints, if you mix yellow and blue, you'll get green. With GANs, if you mix a bunch of images from different data sets, they don't really mix together per se. You'll usually get like things that either look like mountains or look like forest or look like lakes or desert, but there isn't a whole lot of like mixing together the way that like paints would mix. So out of curiosity, I get updates from my like productivity or whatever it's called, digital wellness apps on my computer, and it alerted me that my usage was up, and so I went back at like previous weeks, and so I guess before the project started I was averaging about 9 hours a day on the computer. The last 3 weeks it's been between 11 and 12 hours a day. So I do need to spend more time outside, but I think that this is also just kind of a testament to how much fun I've been having. Everything from like the data collection process and the image editing to deciding how to train the neural nets, and then post-processing the videos as well. I've also done some more experiments. I'm sorry if you're an algorithm, this image is offensive. So I was curious about training on like flesh, everything from like bodies to lips to yoga poses to you know, close-ups of hands and necks and things like that. And the GAN created these really interesting images that have actually been censored, some of them on Twitter. So I have to be careful not to get my account accidentally removed from the internet. But I think that they're really like beautiful and interesting and ephemeral in their own way. Some other experiments, I was curious about training a face scan just on my own face. I'm a millennial, so I have a lot of selfies. And so on Google Photos, you can actually search for the word face and it will give you like all of the images of faces in your data or in your photos. So this was my self-portrait. Unfortunately, it didn't get my strange teeth. It seemed to normalize them quite a bit. But in general, I think it was an interesting experiment. And then also with Mass Mutual research, I've been thinking about the Ask Docs data set. I uploaded that to the generative model, generative text model, and seeded it with the phrase, "I was diagnosed with COVID." And these were some of the outputs. So I think it's interesting to see some of the dates pop up, people talking about loss of smell. I'm also a little skeptical of this person, digital person, who claims that they've had it almost 5 times. So just kind of an interesting, like throwing it at the wall, seeing what sticks. So stay tuned. The Voyager EP releases on March 5th on music streaming platforms. Alexa is no longer on Facebook, so she's asking for help in disseminating hype about the album and sharing it with folks. And then I've also created this alt account for my GAN art so that I don't flood my main feed with tons and tons of these images. So if you're curious, you can follow at Nodradek, inspired by the Franz Kafka short story, Cares of a Family Man, on Twitter, Instagram. I'm also on OpenSea and Spoonflower. So I have a short addendum, but I think I'm out of time, so I will pause and take questions here.
Are we clapping? We should clap.
Well, one of us was. I am just so glad.
Can we do an unmute and clap? Unmute and clap.
Unmute and clap! Yeah!
It was absolutely incredible. A transcendent story time.
Amazing. So glad we recorded.
Oh my God.
Questions for Jane or Alexa?
Wait, Alexa, what was the Twitter handle?
Oh, so it's only on, I'm only doing music stuff on Instagram right now.
Instagram. Okay.
Yeah.
I follow that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny. I abandoned Facebook for like ethical reasons, and I'm still on Instagram, which is like doesn't make sense. But yeah, I used to have like an actual fan page with like almost 3,000 people on it, and I just got rid of that when I got rid of Facebook. So I've been trying to think of creative ways to share the project. And yeah, and Jane and I have been brainstorming too about like I would love someday to like see this in a space or have like an experience where you could actually like walk through and like, so yeah, if people have ideas about stuff
I
like
would
that.
love to exhibit this at the center when we're all back. It would
Totally.
be so cool.
That would be great. I keep thinking about how it would be such a good candidate for projection mapping. Like, because it's so textural, you could really like projection map onto all walls of a space.
Yeah, actually,
It was spectacular.
I think that would be really cool. I actually was just talking to somebody at UVM about just that, so maybe that would be a cool collaboration.
Jane, with the censoring that happened, what? So it was on Twitter only or Instagram as well?
Yeah, so that one was only on Twitter, and
Was it people complaining or was it automatic? Was it
no, it was
algorithmic?
automatic. It was like as
Yeah.
soon as I uploaded it, I uploaded 4 images and it labeled it as sensitive content. So it didn't remove it totally, but it just flagged it as being sensitive. So you have to like click show in
I
order to
see.
see it.
So somehow they thought this was just
Yeah.
no. What do you think they were thinking? That it was just naked people or something? Because it's
Yeah,
also like a
I think
time
they thought
machine
it,
situation that went wrong.
yeah, I think they
That's
thought that it was pornographic.
yeah. It's more in the what is it? Trichophobic or it's like yeah, which is fine too. But yeah.
Yeah, Juniper says it is a bit disturbing. It is kind of like, yeah, if you didn't know that it was computer generated and you thought that it was a photograph of something in real life, you might be seriously concerned.
Yeah, it's like some sort of serial killer mixed with something a little pornographic.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
the top
From
left of your meaning
yeah.
space, Peter.
Yeah, from some Denmark indie film situation. Yeah, right. But the thing about it is the uncertainty too, right? When you're going through some of this, like what might emerge next, like the landscape stuff, you feel like there's a flow and you're like pretty, this is gonna be a forest and you're gonna be like, there's a safety maybe with that. But this other stuff, you're like, oof, this could turn into anything, which is, it's a pretty good horror thing as well, right? That's good. Yeah.
Jane, did you experiment at all with, or maybe other people do this with the audio having some component as feeding back into what the GAN is doing?
Yes, I wasn't able to like put the audio into the GAN in any way. But when I was choosing the frames for the latent walk, you can explore latent space and like pick which frames you want to use and kind of string them together. And so what I did, for example, with survival with the fire images, because I trained that one on images of like candles and like memorials and things like that, and then also like campfires and bonfires and pyrotechnics. I kind of picked images from the latent space early on that were from like the candle and memorial images, and then kind of intentionally built it up as the song progressed, and then at the end kind of brought it back down. And actually for most of the videos I did try and start with like either monochromatic or like visually simple frames, and then kind of build up to more complex frames, and then pull out from there. And then the speed of the video is also synced to the speed of the music.
Okay, so there is some tuning that you're doing. Okay, it makes sense that you'd want that. And Alexa, is there any interest in when a performance is happening and having these things, producing visuals for, in some way that you have no control over maybe what it's going to do, but that's one interesting aspect. Like you could play these behind, while you're performing, but I'm just wondering whether you feel like, having like what the mood of your, desired performance space is and whether this could fit into it.
Yeah, it's really funny. I'm feeling very hermit-like when it comes to like actual live performance. And also I would have no idea how to replicate this because a lot of it I use like an MPK mini, which is like, we use a lot of digital sounds and a lot of just really weird sounds, scratches and like plucks and things that went through machines. So um, I would have a hard time even imagining like what a live performance would look like other than me playing like the guitar or the uke over all these other sounds, or maybe just singing the vocals over the recorded tracks. I mean, I think the highest form of experiencing this could possibly be just like, I could envision like if you were able to partner with a museum where you're moving from room to room with a pair of, headphones on or something, and you're actually just experiencing the visuals without a live performance. But yeah, it's an interesting thought.
I mean, people have headphones with them, right? Could we set up something so you just connect on your phone to whatever's playing? Like, could we do that? We could probably do that. So people could just walk in and, you just, there's a little instruction and yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yes, to planetarium. Oh my God. That's like the most immersive. Yeah. I was telling Jane when I lived in New York, I went to this super weird place and I can't remember the name of it, but basically it was like this visual art sort of like dinner thing. And you go and you sit in like a big concrete square, basically on the floor and eat. And then they just project art all around you, like on all of the walls and the ceiling the whole time. But something like totally immersive like that would be really, really cool.
I've also been learning more and more about the like crypto art and NFT space, and recently came across, and Alexa and I haven't spoken about this. I know that like having a physical space is definitely a high priority, but there's some really interesting like virtual spaces in like the crypto art world, like museums that have like hundreds of people going through them every day, where you're literally just walking around and experiencing art in virtual space. So the pandemic has definitely had a really interesting effect on art and music, I think, for everyone.
Yeah, I just want to say like super fantastic work. There's a lot that I'd love to talk to you about. But I just wanted to specifically draw attention to and kind of ask about like in this McLuhan-esque, right, artistic space where the medium is the message. So much of the burden on the artist is in curation, and especially like when you're working with GANs, right? I mean, we like them as this kind of unpredictable force, but the curation of the data set has like a profound effect on the quality and like the tone of the images that are produced. And I am inspired by like the depth of kind of thoughtful curation work that you put into some of these. And I just wanted to ask maybe more about how you thought about your creation process in creating these data sets.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely an interesting process because it's simultaneously like a lesson that I learned several times over, was that like the images that are meaningful to humans are not meaningful to computers, and when they reproduce something that looks visually similar to the images that you selected, the meaning that you've assigned to those source images is maybe not going to come out in the computer generated images. So like the churches was a good example of that. The protest imagery was another one that I think just didn't cross from the human to the computer back to the human again. So it's a really interesting process to be like curating images and thinking about them not from the perspective of a person, but from the perspective of a person receiving images that are created by a computer. Like the fire imagery, for example, was interesting because there were some scenes that I was like, well, I would never make a music video with those scenes. Like some of the campfire scenes, it was like there were like, you know, people like drinking beers and like eating hamburgers, which like I would never put people eating hamburgers in like the video that I was trying to make. But because in the pre-processing, I was cropping these images, and then through the GAN, like if one hamburger makes it through, it's probably not going to make it to the end. It's really only when those things show up over and over and over again. It was really inconsequential to including that image in the data set.
Okay, well, let's we're a little bit over. Let's give Jane and Alexa a round of applause again. Please unmute if you're feeling up to it. That was awesome.